There is an ancient Celtic festival that has been part of Western European tradition for thousands of years. The celebration would last for 2 days and mark the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. During the festival, great fires were built, and in the light of their flame, druid-like religious leaders would open portals to the other world by uncovering the great burial mounds and tombs. Sacrifices and tributes were then made to the dead, and if some tales are to be believed, the spirits of the dead would rise again and join the festivities. This is the Great Fire of Peace, the festival of Samhain. The concept of Samhain is thought to have begun in ancient Ireland and then travelled to Scotland, along with the early Gaels. Here the traditions and practices of the Gaels became eternally interwoven with those of the new land. Not much is known about these early festivals and celebrations, but we do know that Samhain became an integral part of Scottish culture and history. In Scotland, Samhain has always been a time for great merriment and celebration. The festivities would take place on the evening of October the 31st and continue well into the morning of November the 1st. During this time, it was thought that the veil which separated this world and the other world would thin, allowing the spirits of the dead to return for a single night each year. Many in the Highlands believed that their dead kin would return home for the night, and it was not uncommon for families to leave empty places and extra food up on the table as an offering to their ancestors. This thinning of the veil would also allow the old gods, known as the Divination, to enter the mortal realm. The elven spirits of the otherworld were greatly respected, but also feared, as the she or fair folk had great powers. On the night of Samhain, Highlanders would leave offerings of food and drink all around the perimeter of their home. These gifts would grant the people safety and wellness over the winter months. Sometimes these gifts would be given to a local spirit to foster goodwill. Farmers and crofters were known to leave out saucers of milk for the cutshee or fairy cat. This mischievous spirit would bless the homes that left out milk and curse the homes that didn't. One tale showing a very specific offering comes from the Outer Hebrides on the Isle of Lewis. There on the island, the people of Lewis were known to show great deference to the Shawnee, a powerful water spirit. So once every year, each family would offer up a small bag of malt, and from these bags a strong ale would be brewed. Then on the night of Samhain, a man would be chosen to wade out up to his waist in the ice-cold sea, carrying with him a large cup of ale. There he would stand and shout aloud, "Shawnee, I gie you this cup of ale, hoping that thou wilt be so good as to send us plenty seaware for enriching our grun for the coming year." Then the man would cast the ale into the sea and return to the shore. After this offer was made, the islanders would head out to the fields, and there around a great fire they would drink all the ale that was left and sleep upon the ground. As the sun rose the next morning, the farmers would return home, knowing that they would have plenty seaweed to fertilize their crops with next season. Not all of the interactions with the spirits or fair folk were as pleasant as the Shawnee and the ale. There are many tales of Scotsmen on Samhain night witnessing the incredible sight of the Slua, or fairy host. It was said that from time to time, the Divination would ride out to hunt or to war. During these occasions, it was possible to witness the great army of the Fae travelling across the midnight sky. Some tell that the host was armed for combat, while others say that they were accompanied by their ethereal hunting hounds, the Cushii. In some parts of Scotland, the Slua was known as the Slua na Marith, or Host of the Dead. Here the Doinashii would lead vast hordes of human spirits through the darkness. These dead men were thought to have been the spirits of those who had not been forgiven for their actions in life. If you got too near the host, it was possible to get swept along with them. People taken by the host were transported great distances. Some tales even mention villagers ending up on other islands, and every now and then the person would be gone forever, forced to march within the ranks of the dead for eternity. In Perthshire, there is the tale of a clergyman who made it well known in the area that he did not believe in any of the old stories concerning the Sidhe, and that the Christian God was the one and only God. But late one Samhain night, as the man was returning home from the church, he was suddenly seized by the Sidhe and hoisted aloft into the sky. The poor man was carried above the clouds at a terrifying pace and dragged far and wide as part of the great Slua. Eventually, the man begged the Doinashii to let him return to the ground, and he would never again disavow their existence. Accepting his pleas, the Sidhe let him down at the door of his house, where he collapsed exhausted. The next day, he was awoken by some of his parishioners, who were worried that he had collapsed through illness. The clergyman, looking very much worse for the wear after his night with the great host, told the people of his strange encounter and of how he gained his freedom from the wicked spirits. Some believed the man's tale, but many others thought his misfortune and poor choice of bed may have been related to an entirely different sort of powerful spirit. One of the most essential parts of Samhain was fire. All over Scotland, on the night of the 31st, great bonfires would be built. These fires were so numerous and large that they could be seen from many miles away. It has been said that the fire may have at one time represented the power of the sun, or were built in worship of a long-forgotten god or deity. Whatever their origin, the fire is a vital part of the festival. It was customary in much of the Scottish Highlands for each district to prepare hundreds of torches weeks before Samhain. And on the night, every youth that could carry a torch would be sent to run the perimeter of the town or village with the blazing torch in hand. The circumference of burning light, combined with the huge bonfires, was said to protect the people and the village from the Sidhe. It was due to this protective nature of the flames that they were known as the fires of peace. In the land of Moray, young boys would travel door to door in the village, asking the families to spare some wood for the fire. They would spend days or sometimes weeks collecting fuel and building great fires along the coast. On Samhain night, as the fuel was lit, the boys would cast the rotting bones of cattle into the fire before leaping through the flames, cleansing themselves of evil and protecting themselves from harm. In other areas, two fires would be lit next to each other, and local farmers would lead their cattle between the flames. This cleansed them of all ills. The ashes left by these fires were saved and taken home, for it was thought by the people of Moray that they retained some of the power of the great fire within them and could be used later on for protection. It was thought by many of the Scottish people that the thinning of the veil between worlds also increased the potency of magical charms and practices, which leads us to the next part of Samhain, divination. Once the fires were lit and the village safe from evil, the people would return home to enjoy the festivities with friends and family. It is here where we find many interesting customs. In one, the young women of the village would place two hazelnuts near an open fire, one named after themselves, and the other was named for a man they desired. As the nuts roasted on the fire, the future of the relationship would be told. If the nuts jumped out of the flame, the relationship would be doomed and would end in heartbreak. If they roasted slowly and quietly, it foretold a good match. Another custom for those wishing to meet a future romance was to bake an oat bannock and consume it in 3 bites. Once it had been eaten, the person was to stay silent and head straight to bed without anything to drink. It is said that this practice would result in a dream in which your future partner or lover would appear and offer you water to quench your thirst. Kale pulling was also a method of divining knowledge of a future partner. On Samhain night, women would head to the fields and with their eyes closed pull out a stalk of kale. The size of the stalk was said to foretell their partner's height, and the amount of soil that clung to the roots was an indication of wealth. One of the oldest customs was that of duking for apples, or bobbing for apples, as some may know it now. Here a handful of apples were cast into a large basin of water, and engaged men and women would try and bite into a floating apple. The first to succeed would become the first couple married in the village that year, and so on until all the couples had dates for the big day. Travellers and those looking for adventure would throw a shoe over the house on Samhain night. The landing position of the shoe would dictate the direction the traveller should head, but if the soul was facing upwards, then the journey would end in sadness. In many houses, all of the family members and friends would take an egg with them to the party. Before the end of the night, they would all gather round and have their futures told by the eldest female of the group. The eggs would be pierced by a pin, and a small amount of the white would drip into a clear glass of water. It was thought that the resulting shapes produced within the water could foretell many things in that person's life: who they would marry, where they would travel, how many children they would have, if the next year's harvest would be good or poor. There are an almost infinite amount of shapes the egg white could take, and just as much questions one could ask of the old sage. The last part of Samhain I will talk about is Guising. Guising was the practice of dressing or disguising oneself as a she or spirit. It was thought that guising began as a way to avoid the she or malevolent spirits if you were to travel out with the fires on the night of Samhain. It was thought that if you appeared to be a spirit or she, you would be safe, as the Fae never attacked their own. As the years went on, the custom became more prevalent across Scotland, and the costumes would become more elaborate, and people would start to create hollowed out turnips with wicked looking faces carved into them. Within these turnips, or neepy lanterns as they were known, was placed a burning candle. It was thought that the fire and the frightening visage of the geyser and their turnip would drive away the dark spirits. This practice would eventually evolve to the point where children would dress up like spirits or the she and go from house to house with the threat of making mischief and cursing the inhabitants. And we all know how the spirits were appeased. Gifts of food and drink would be given to the child-sized spirits in return for the safety of the home. So on the evening of this coming Sunday, raise a drink to the old gods and take a moment to spare a thought for the spirits of relatives and loved ones who have left this world. For tonight only, they drink with you and hear your words. Slanjava.